Hi, I'm Netta Spencer, and we have a very lively conversation coming up about the current status of Gandhiism in the world. Everybody remembers and is very keen to live with the memory of that wonderful man, Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Gandhi, who, in fact, I think probably got freedom for his country, really got the independence of India. Uh, the legacy of Gandhi still continues today. And there are universities around the world that teach Gandhian studies. And one university in particular is in Gujarat. And this is the Gujarat Vidyapith University. Is that how you say it, Yeshua?
Yes, it
Uh,
is.
he is Yeshua Moser Points One, who recently, I think, completed a PhD at that university in Gandhian studies. But our two speakers who I think are carrying on the tradition or the legacy of Gandhi in different ways are Carl Klein, who's an American in, I think, South Dakota, who runs something called the Satyagraha Institute. And he's going to tell us about the work that they do around the world, actually. And another man is Anand Masgaonkar, who is with something called the National Alliance of People's Movement in India. He's also in Gujarat. And both of these men are, I would say, probably carrying on the tradition of the constructive program that Gandhi carried out. In other words, he wasn't just a man who was teaching people how to protest against injustice and carry out civil resistance to injustice, which is, I think, what we think of mostly nowadays. But he also had what might be called social work or public health work or other kinds of programs that were actually meant to overcome the social problems of poverty and illness and how to live well. So I'd like you both to say hello. Anand, give us a thought about your own work. You're in what city in Gujarat?
I happen to be incidentally at Gujarat Vidyapith, the university you just mentioned.
I see. Okay. And are you there quite a lot? Does the
No,
work take you
no.
or just no? Just
Visit there only about once a month.
uh-huh,
I would immediately join issue with you, at least on one word that you used,
uh-huh.
project. I see this, I see what we do. I'm a small drop in a large ocean.
Mhm.
But what we do, I consider as being lifestyle, experiment, struggles. I do not quite see it as a project.
All right. Well, fine. I won't quarrel with you. If I do, I'll save it up for something really important. All right, fine. Carl Klein, say hello to us and tell us a start about what you do.
What we're doing these days is the Satyagraha Institute. It's an institute that takes the phrase Satyagraha seriously. We try to bring together a diverse group, an international group, every year in the Black Hills of South Dakota to explore what that means in our own lives. And especially these days where we're challenged by the violence that people are doing to the earth. We try to bring people together with the original inhabitants of that area, the Black Hills of South Dakota, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota people, and to learn from their wisdom as well as the wisdom of Gandhi in terms of things that we can be about in our time to change the climate of violence that we're experiencing.
Mm-hmm. I believe you're a Christian minister, aren't you?
I'm ordained in the United Church of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my ministerial career has been in academia. in different colleges and universities around the country.
What sort of things were you teaching?
I think that a lot of my ministry really grew out of my experience in India with Gandhi and the followers of Gandhi.
So this is a long time thing that with you.
This is a long time thing. It started back in 1977 with my first trip to India. And I've been there a dozen times since. And it resulted in organizing people on the campus here in this area to go to the largest nuclear weapons facility in the world, Ellsworth Air Force Base, which is in Rapid City. We went there on Easter Sunday to symbolically place lilies at the site of the tomb, which was the 150 Minuteman missiles that were scattered across the plains. So those were the kinds of things that we would do in campus ministry.
Okay, that's wonderful. Yeshua, I should introduce Yeshua by saying he's an old friend. We've known each other quite a few years. And Yeshua is in Victoria, where he is the leader of the Nonviolence International branch in Canada. Nonviolence International has outposts in a number of different places. It used to be mostly, well, there's one in Washington, D.C., there was one in Moscow until a while back, and now there's one in Victoria, British Columbia. And he also works for Mines Action Canada, or the international, something about landmines. What's the word for it, Yeshua?
The International Campaign to Ban Landmines, yes.
All right, yeah.
The Ottawa Convention, as a Canadian, you should know that.
Well, the terminology sometimes escapes me. Sorry about that. And I see we have our leader in the background. You have a photo of Gandhi with some quotation, which I can't read. Something about without work. I can't read it. What is this slogan that we should?
It's the 7 social sins. Politics without principles, wealth without, goes on.
Okay.
But I would highlight in relation to this particular grouping of people that I'm on the grant making board of the A.J. Muste Institute. And we give grants to people's organizations around the planet to carry on nonviolence training, because unfortunately the training we get in most of our societies is not for exercising our power, but for obeying power. And it takes some unlearning to go through that. I think Carl Klein is an excellent example of setting in motion a process of unlearning that, or examining those things in our culture that drive violent conflict. And so we support nonviolence trainings in different parts of the planet in the last, since 1994, what is that? About 25 years. We've supported trainings in over 30 countries now in East, Southeast, South Asia, Africa, South and Latin America.
You're speaking of the A.J. Muste
The A.J. Muste Institute.
So Yeshua just referred to development projects, Just one small instance of what India has defined as development has to do with construction of dams. What dams do is they impound water, supply it to cities, the better of people, big farmers, at the cost of displacement to Adivasis, the indigenous people, the First Nation people. And when I'm referring to displacement and submergence of villages, I'm referring to numbers of a staggering nature. For instance, the dams that India has constructed over the last 70 years of India's independence, at least 50 million people, 50 million Adivasis may have been displaced without any rehabilitation, without any resettlement, loss of employment, reducing autonomous, self-employed, self-reliant indigenous people to people begging for jobs in cities. There's only one area of development. We've done that with the kind of industries, with mining projects, with infrastructure projects. All these so-called development projects have only displaced people. So as Yeshua was saying earlier, somebody pays and somebody gains. It is the working people, toiling people who are always at the wrong end of the stake. That has been our experience, and that is what we try to fight. I might just add, Gandhi is such a big name, sometimes a brand value, a brand in across the world. And the impression we get, we tend to think that Gandhi was a huge success. What I would like to say is, even within India, even during the struggle of independence, Gandhi was only a tool used by some people. Nonviolence was a tactic. Nobody really subscribed to Gandhi's real ideas and philosophy.
Now tell me, what is it that you think people in his own day would have found objectionable?
Nonviolence, not just in action, but in thinking. Now that is something even his closest associates and allies did not subscribe to. So what we ended up doing through our struggle for independence is just to manage the color of the skin of our rulers. We now have brown rulers instead of white-skinned rulers, but nothing really has changed. We still subscribe to the philosophy. We still follow our colonial legacy in terms of development.
Now, is this largely a question of militarism? I mean, certainly the first thing that would spring to my mind is that India is by no means a pacifist country, and probably never has been.
Our international problems with neighbors, we haven't really relied on nonviolence. We haven't had faith in nonviolence. But we haven't had faith in nonviolence even in dealing with our own people, whether it was interreligious harmony, whether it's development. There has not been any negotiation. We haven't, our decision-making process has been violent in a way where some experts make decisions for everybody. So that's not democracy at all. So violence of various different kinds, visible violence, violence that is not immediately visible, violence that is of a subtle nature, violence that is not questioned, violence where the poorest, the toiling people, the farmers, the indigenous people, Adivasis suffer.
What are you doing on a daily basis when you're out working with people in villages and so on?
The indigenous people, indigenous tribes in India were affected by either a mine or a development or a dam, construction of a dam, and they came to us for help. We would try to help them organize, train them, resist with them, offer satyagraha, physically prevent construction of a project. Industries that we have, for instance, cause environmental pollution. They kill rivers, they pollute groundwaters, there's hazardous solid waste. We try to organize communities affected by industrial pollution. We have successfully managed to prevent setting up of a nuclear power plant. Nuclear power plant is a very sexy idea in India because, quote unquote, we believe that India has harnessed the technology to use nuclear power for, quote unquote, peaceful purposes. That is something we managed to challenge and win. So we managed to kick out an American-backed 6,000 megawatt nuclear power project in Gandhi's Gujarat.
Really? Oh, was that before it got built, or did you shut it down after or during?
No, before the first effort was made at land acquisition.
Well done.
Oh yeah. Yes, we wish you'd come and help us. Ontario has a very heavy concentration of nuclear power plants, and we have the same kind of struggle that goes on.
Struggle is one front. The other front we seek to look at is construction, reconstruction, alternatives. So working for Adivasi land rights, working for organic farming, working for local self-reliant employment, self-employment. These are the alternatives we try to propagate.
Now, tell me about land rights. I have a good relationship with Roger Gopal and his wife Jill Carr Harris. You may know them. And I know that they also had been working for land rights and I know that Roger Gopal led a march across India a few years ago, asking for a guarantee that the people who were displaced from their land would have a small plot of land promised to them. Tell me about that.
Rajgopal led a huge march, something that managed to create a great awakening, something where the government of the day had to promise to deal with the demands. Similarly, across the country, we were part of a network that wanted to the government to pass a law to give titles to lands that Adivasis already had in possession. So while Adivasis had lands in their own possession because of traditional rights, customary rights, what they did not have is official, formal, legal titles. So 15 years ago, we managed, as part of a large struggle across the country, part of a network, we managed to get from the last government what was called the Forest Rights Act, which would give land rights to the Adivasis, would give official land rights to the Adivasis, including the wives, the women being joint holders of the title of the land, because traditionally Adivasis had possession of land but did not have own titles, because it was a customary right. And they could be chucked out of their land in the name of a development project anytime, anywhere. So we managed to get a law passed in the year 2005, 2006, where land titles, entitlements became a matter of right for the Adivasis. The struggle is still on for the implementation, and the government wants to backtrack, whether it's any government, it doesn't matter which party runs the government. Their attitude to the toiling people, whether it's the Adivasis, whether it's the farmers, whether it is the displaced people, is pretty much the same.
Okay, I also have a friend, Jean Drez, who has been working with on the right to food. Can you tell me about that? Would you consider that a part of the related to your own work?
Oh, absolutely. We've had farmer suicides across the countries. There have been hunger and malnutrition deaths over the last few years since the onset of what we call the neoliberal policies that India has pursued in the last 28 years. And there was a Supreme Court petition, a public interest litigation is what we call it here, of which lots of civil liberties organizations, including John Rays and many others, were part of. And they managed to get orders from the court saying right to food was a fundamental right, And so right to food was one thing. The other thing was what was called the Employment Guarantee Act. NREGA is what it was called, the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, that guaranteed 100 days of work, guaranteed by government across the country for anyone who demanded it. George Rees played a very important role in the struggle for that law too.
Okay.
I'd like to ask Carl Klein to jump in here a little bit on, Carl, you've got land rights issues in South Dakota as well, don't you? I think the Satyagraha Institute has focused some on that.
I think that Dakota people here were amazed at the news coverage of what was taking place at Notre Dame. And how troubled people were that this sacred site was burning. And they thought about all of the sacred sites that are being desecrated and destroyed of theirs that nobody seems to pay any attention to. That certainly happened with the development of the pipeline at Standing Rock. Many sacred sites there were destroyed. And part of the problem is that pipeline companies will come in and they'll have white archaeologists check out the places as to whether or not they're sacred sites, but they have no conception of what it is that's sacred to indigenous people of this area.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll see pipelines that are the pipeline area is dug up to put in the pipeline, and you'll see skeletons
Oh my
in
goodness.
because what they're doing is they're going through a Native American cemetery. So, of course, there are land issues here because this area, according to treaty, the place where I live is, according to the treaty, Native American land. I'm a squatter on Native American land, and most people in the state are. So, one of the helpful things last year at our institute in the Black Hills was that we had a young woman there from Sharon in Mexico. And Sharon is the first legally self-determining community in Mexico. The people of that community said, we're not going to have any army here. We're not going to have any police here. We're not going to have any politicians here. This is our community, and we're going to be self-determining in terms of what happens here.
Is this a region or a city or what? I have never heard the expression Sharon.
This is a community.
It's like a town.
It's a town, but also incorporates some of the rural area around it.
Uh-huh.
Our experience in the Institute in Mexico, in Nigeria, with Lakota people here in this part of the world is exactly what Ananda was talking about in terms of exploitation of people. People don't have sovereignty any longer over their land, over their water, over their food, over their education. And we need to find ways to enable people to retain that. I mean, I need to retain that in the culture that I'm living in.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the kinds of, power that doesn't concern themselves with that. I think of Flint, Michigan, where people are still drinking water that's not fit for a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been, 4 or 5 years?
Hmm.
So one of our concerns as the Institute is to find ways to enable people who come, and kind of unlike Anand, the work that you're doing, we don't have a specific territory and group that we work with, but we invite people who are active already in their own communities to come and dig deeper. And our priorities are to dig deeper in terms of knowledge, and that's knowledge of Gandhi. Matai is with us in almost all of our programs as our Gandhian scholar. But we also look to Martin Luther King and to Dorothy Day and to other models who are out there in nonviolence. And we also, and you mentioned this earlier, the whole idea of spiritual grounding.
Mm-hmm.
We'd like people to have a deeper knowledge, but also a deeper spiritual grounding, whatever their tradition is, so that they can be empowered to do the kind of work that they need to do. We want people to have better skills when they leave. So we do conflict resolution work. And then finally, we're trying to build a network of people who are together long enough, and our programs are generally at least a week long, sometimes 9 to 10 days. They're there long enough so that they get to know each other. They can call each other when they have issues that they may be confronting and believe that somebody has a suggestion for them. But to build a network of people across those barriers that are dividing the human communities these days, whether it's race or religion or ethnicity or gender or sexual orientation, whatever it happens to be.
I'm interested in comparing the effectiveness of uh, civil resistance movements, I guess, is probably the best way to characterize what you're both talking about, because it seems to me that Anand is talking about things that have happened in India that have pretty much succeeded. I mean, your ability to get land rights for Adivasi people is more impressive than anything I know of in terms of the protest of indigenous people in North America. I think more people here are defeated than have succeeded. But the very fact that the right to food was enacted as some kind of legislation in India is would be an amazing thing. You've mentioned the pipeline situation. Clearly, that we have protests in Canada too against the construction of pipelines, and most of these protests have not stopped a single pipeline.
I would just disagree in
Well,
terms of what happened at Standing Rock. I mean, the pipeline is in place and it's operating, but there were significant things that happened there. One was that indigenous people came together from all over the globe, which had never happened before. And that has set in motion some energy that is global. It's global in the sense that banks and financial institutions in Europe, as well as in North America and other places, are divesting from fossil fuels at the behest of basically indigenous people. So I think that we haven't seen the results of Standing Rock yet. And if the Keystone actually begins to get built, we'll see something more extraordinary than we saw at Standing Rock.
congratulations to Klein too. Uh, lest I present a picture that looks only rosy, I must say that it is an ongoing struggle. It's a battle all the time.
Mm-hmm.
What I was talking about are the few bright spots in an ongoing struggle that the toiling people otherwise seem to be losing. Every government, every successive government seems to become more and more rabidly neoliberal. The inequality is the greatest at this current time, greater than it has ever been. The disparity, the kind of crony and corporate capitalism that every government is a handmaiden of, makes it only worse and worse. You know, I was referring to only a few shining examples, right? But how it works is, the first stage is finding information, creating awareness, mobilization. Then comes the point where the government has to take a step back, you know. So actually it is a fight for every square inch of space.
Mm-hmm.
Passing a law does not automatically mean it will be implemented. It is an ongoing struggle. Therefore, I see this whole struggle as a process of political change rather than victory and defeat, success or failure. I see it as an ongoing process of empowerment of people. There are no end points. There cannot be an end game. There might be small end games in a battle here and a battle there, but ultimately it is a process of evolution where people become more and more aware. Unfortunately, there are other currents within the current milieu, this current system, that run counter to this. Therefore, it's a multi-dimensional battle that people have to fight. It's not against only a project, a policy, but technology, for instance. Technology is going against people. So some battles that are won might become redundant, because of change of technology. We might win a battle to save our resources somewhere, save the river somewhere, save some bit of land somewhere, and the technology changes in a way where more and more people are becoming disemployed.
Gandhi himself was very he liked hand. I he likes that people use spinning wheels and weave their own cloth and so on. He likes simple living. He clearly recommended a lifestyle that was not technologically advanced. And some of the people that I've had conversations with, who are former members of ashrams and so on, seem to be very opposed to many new technological innovations. Is that a general position? Can you characterize the overall view of Gandhi's followers today as to whether or not they're skeptical about the value of most new technologies?
Tools were to give an extension to the hand, not to replace it. And that was his conception. And, so you might have a spade that, extends the extremities, but you don't need a front end loader that replaces the kind of bread labor that we all need to do.
I don't care if if anybody doesn't identify oneself as this or that. I believe ultimately every ideology, even an ideology, organizations do not survive beyond one generation. Maybe ideologies that get reduced to an ism survive maybe 2 or 3 generations.
Mm-hmm.
So I think every succeeding generation must discover its own truths, if you like, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of, I once spent a couple of weeks with Narayan Desai many years ago, and he was horrified about computers. And I don't know whether he ever got over it. I think he also, I remember somebody had a lot of trouble calling him. He didn't have a telephone, and they had great difficulty getting in touch with him. And he, at one point he said, oh, yes, I have a telephone. And they said, you do? Why haven't you told us? And he said, well, it's not attached to anything. I guess he had a telephone instrument in his house, but it wasn't connected. How much of that attitude is still prevalent? And I must say, it's certainly not only among people that think of themselves as influenced by Gandhi. I have many of my peace activist friends who are also very Luddites, I would say, almost.
I wouldn't consider Gandhi Luddite, I mean, technology is a tool. Gandhi used technology. Gandhi used telegrams, He used to send long, long telegrams, spend all the money he needed for something that was needed, that was really necessary. Our problem is about fascination with technologies, believing that technology solves all problems, I mean, there are so many things to look at. For instance, money, funding, finances, we will use money for struggle. But ultimately, even a battle against the kind of financial overpowering that we experience, we are fighting that, fighting the power of finance using some money. Similarly with technology, there are some technologies we will use, but we will. There need not be any fascination of technologies. It's a tool, and put it in the place it belongs to. Right? We will ask about the implications and the impacts of technology, for instance. I mean, people may seek to point out contradictions in our positions, but I mean, we are not living on islands. We are products of our times, and we will use the very technology to try to bring more justice and bring an end to it, in a sense.
This sort of skepticism about technology is, in a way, more consistent with some of the things that we're hearing now about the necessity of reducing our carbon footprint and using fewer of the world's limited material resources and so on. So indeed, living more simply and consuming less has a rationale that comes from many different sources.
We are not trying to build a Gandhian body of an organization that believes in Gandhism.
Mhm. Okay.
My effort today would be to bring together all kinds of people and together, learn from each other, ask the right questions, and build up a larger movement. And our effort over the last 25 years, we've been part of networks that are quote unquote national in a sense, and a lot of the struggles we fought are national, whether it's the right to food that you refer to via John Drees, whether it's the forest rights, whether it's against displacement in the quote unquote, the third world. It is still possible for communities to come together. People in the West, where you're part of a system where insurance, survival is that much more difficult, you have to work. Our lifestyles are much simpler, and therefore it is possible to survive outside the system. And that is what makes a lot of our struggles possible.
I'd like to ask a little bit about whether or not there has been any effort against India's atomic weapons.
Yes, but because of the kind of struggles we are engaged in, which have more to do with bare minimum day-to-day survival, it's a position, it's a philosophical position with symbolic protests every now and then. For instance, 20 years ago when we did our nuclear tests, there were protests, but they are limited mainly to the big cities and exclusive groups of activists and organizations who are labeled as anti-national, by the way, I might add.
I would like to know, Carl, a little bit about more of the institutes that you've been holding in other parts of the world. You have, I think in our previous conversation, you mentioned that you held summer workshops or sessions in other countries.
Well, the first program, as I mentioned to you, started in 2015, and that was in the Black Hills of South Dakota. We didn't have any intention of running programs in other countries at that point. But there were people from Mexico who were there participating in that program, and they took it home. And so ever since 2015, we've had a program in Mexico every year. In fact, one of our faculty members has dedicated his ranch in Mexico as the place for the Satyagraha Institute and is building a community there. And in the second year that we had a program, there was a woman from Nigeria who decided to take that back home. And she put together, with the help of others, the first program in Nigeria. So that took place in 2017. And in that program, there was a person from Ghana who said, we need this program in Ghana. And so in 2018, we had our first program in Ghana. And it's all done by volunteers. There are people who decide that this is the kind of training that would be useful in their place, in their home country. And they invite faculty that we supply them. MP Matai has been a faculty member in all of those programs in Africa, as has been our faculty member from Mexico, Fernando Ferrara. So that's the way we've grown. And this last year in Africa, because we've had people in our programs from different countries in Africa, and many of them would say, well, we want you to bring a program to the Congo, or we want you to bring a program to Liberia, or Ethiopia, or Cameroon. And we can't do that. I mean, we don't have the resources to always be sending people from someplace else.
By the way, what is it they want from you? What are they expecting of you, and what are you able to give them?
Well, people have different expectations, and each culture is different. They have, special needs in Nigeria. Of course, you have a divided country. You have Boko Haram in the north. The group that captured all of the schoolgirls. One of our participants in the 2016 program, works with an organization that aids those girls when they're released, helps them in terms of a rehabilitation process.
Mm-hmm.
She's also working hard on child marriage and has produced a documentary with our help on child marriage in Nigeria. Instead of going to school, girls are getting married off at 12, 13, 14 years of age to these 50-year-old men. And so depending on the context, people in that particular culture and place make the determination of how they're going to use their skills and what they're going to develop in that particular place. So in Ghana, it's different. In Liberia, it's different. And so we are not trying to take a one-size-fits-all model to different places, but rather invite people who have had the experience to reproduce it in their own way, in their own setting. And because people are activists in different ways, they apply it in different ways. One of the young men in Brookings who went to our first program in 2015 is a bicycle person. And when he came back, he started a bicycle store in this community. And it's a bicycle store where if you want to repair your bike, you bring it there and they help you learn how to repair it. Mm-hmm. And where they sell used bikes, and where they have been after our city leaders to the point where they invested a sizable amount of money to develop bike trails in this community. And that's his contribution. Mm-hmm. That's his contribution to a cleaner environment, a more sustainable environment right here in his own home place. Mm-hmm. So it depends on the people. And once again, we're not out to organize large groups of people to do particular tasks. What we're hoping to do is to provide an opportunity for people who are already activists in some way to deepen that activism, to perhaps come up with a new strategy, mm-hmm. Perhaps come up with a new sense of their own spiritual grounding that enables them to do something they haven't been able to do before. So there's an organization in Mexico that I've done training with called Uno Uno, One by One. And we've taken that as our model as well. We want to develop personal relationships. We want to deepen people's knowledge, skills, and spiritual grounding so that one by one, we hope to make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Now then, let's see what Yeshua can add to this. I want to hear what it's like to be a student or a professor in a university that had been founded by Gandhi and that I guess is trying to continue Gandhi's legacy in some sense.
Well, as I was a PhD student, it was really the place through which I was doing my studies, and I would only go there periodically to meet with my academic advisor, so I wasn't there full time as I was working elsewhere. But the environment is quite rich. It has that history. Narayan Desai, who you mentioned earlier, was the rector throughout the time that I was at Gujarat Vidyapith. MP Matai, whom we hope to have on here, was my thesis advisor. And my degree was in peace studies. It wasn't in Gandhian studies. But they have a center on peace studies there, peace and nonviolence studies. And for me, it was important to do a degree through a PhD peace program because we have very few of them around the planet. And these need to be promoted. Mm-hmm. Almost all of our human societies say, well, violence is unfortunately something that happens when all else fails. And yet, what is the all else? It's kind of like people jump straight to violence. You really haven't developed peace studies as a curriculum in most of our human societies. It's very difficult to find an institution through which you can get a PhD in peace studies. You could have done it in political science or international relations, but for me it was important to do it in a peace studies program because I wanted to support that type of thing in human society, where we study that. I was a consultant for UNESCO on a peace studies program in Sri Lanka that the government of Sri Lanka wanted to put on some years ago. And I congratulated them on that effort. But I asked them, how many universities do you have that can grant degrees in peace studies? And they kind of all looked at one another and said, well, we don't have any. In the case of Sri Lanka, it was an illustrative case because the government decided that they were going to do peace studies at all levels of their school system, which is fantastic. But I asked them, you know, where is your base for this? Where are your peace studies professionals that can develop the curriculum and evaluate its effectiveness in your school system? So I was asking them, you know, how many universities can grant degrees in peace studies? Well, we don't have any. How many of your universities have full programs in peace studies? No, we don't have any of those either. And how many universities do you have that grant degrees in military studies? Well, they didn't know, but I did. They had 7 of them. And they went all the way up to PhD level, and none of those students paid for their education. It was fully publicly funded. And so I said, now do you want to know why your country's so messed up? You know? And before they felt too bad, I said, the situation isn't any different anywhere else.
That's true, absolutely.
Most peace studies programs are really scratching for money, and it's really hard to get a bursary to study at one of them.
You bet. That's absolutely true. You know, I had a program, I started and ran a program at my campus of the University of Toronto for 13, 14 years. And when I retired, it closed. And I actually wasn't too depressed about it because I thought if they had kept it going, they would have hired just anybody who didn't really know anything about peace studies to run it, and it would have been a bad program. So I'd rather not have it continue than to be badly done, you know.
And isn't that a sad state?
Yeah.
Sad
That's right.
indictment of our situation in education.
But I'm thinking back to Kenneth Boulding. He had the notion that peace studies ought to be an autonomous profession, and that what you need to have it be an academic discipline of its own. A PhD person in peace studies should be able to examine all the candidates for other PhD programs. And he said we have that with peace studies, but people in political science are completely unfamiliar with it. And therefore those, you know, what happens is that usually it's the political science department that administers peace studies programs. And therefore they are in control of what is expected, and they are not able to actually examine the people to qualify them as real experts on peace studies. So I think that there's something like that. We have all of the ingredients for making peace studies into an autonomous and distinctive, so, you know, discipline, academic discipline, and we ought to push for that.
Absolutely. On the technology end, where you were talking about spinning and so forth, you have to remember that this was not a step towards the past or something that was romantic when it was taken on as an activity during the independence struggle in India. It was a very specific constructive program project where the anti-colonial movement was both seeking to create skills and more employment for their own people and undercutting the reliance on British-made cloth. So this was a way to do both of those things at one time, and it was an appropriate technology. So I think the word around technology would really be appropriate. Is it appropriate at a whole lot of levels? Right now, we have a technology that's incredibly fantastic, where I'm sitting several thousand kilometers away from you, and yet we're able to have this discussion more or less face to face. And we wouldn't have had that ability 5 years ago. And so this is an appropriate use of that technology of sharing ideas and information. It cuts both ways. In India, we are seeing people being lynched because of rumors that are put out on social media.
It's worth mentioning the reality that in Myanmar, the Rohingya people has suffered specifically because I understand Facebook is considered the main means of communication there, and there was not enough monitoring of the kind of hate mongering that went on there. Isn't that correct?
It is. It's an interesting case for study because in Myanmar, there was nothing in the way of publicly trusted media until recent times. All the media was state media, and nobody believed what it printed. And so if you wanted information, where did you go? You went to your network of friends. So you always got your information through the friend. If you needed anything at all, the first thing you thought of was not going to some public resource to find it, but you look through your network. Well, let's see, my uncle has a friend who is in that department and maybe they know something.
Yeah.
And this was how you got your information. There was nothing in the way of publicly available information that anyone trusted that wasn't controlled by the former military regime. And so this is the history before the advent, before the introduction of the cell phone. And all of a sudden, a cheap technology comes in. And how do you get on the cell phone to talk to your friends? Well, on Facebook, you have a like button, you like your friend, and you're used to getting your information from your friend. And for the people in Myanmar, Facebook is the internet.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
For the rest of us who've grown up with the internet or we've watched the evolution of the internet, we know that the internet is a whole lot more than Facebook. But for them, Facebook is the internet. And it is messages from your friends. That's who you always got your information from in the past. So
okay,
they were culturally set up to be recipients of information through this new technology in a way that people in other parts of the world who were exposed to the internet before Facebook were not so programmed.
Well, also then that would mean that you would be more likely to get your information from sort of like gossip, people that you know passing on ideas that hadn't been vetted through any press or any other.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so this is a perfect storm. If you're a group who uses that method of communication for nefarious purposes, such as a group who decides that some group is not part of us. And the easiest way to get people to do violence is to tell them they're under attack, and that's exactly what the nationalist element in Myanmar did. Yes, but then you also have the role that Facebook plays. How responsible are they was a question you asked. They didn't. Well, they're a private industry, and there are no controls on them. The groups like Google and Facebook and Microsoft are corporations that are bigger than a number of governments
Mhm.
now. And they play by their own rules. There is nothing that governs them, as it were. While
Mhm.
governments have some rules that are in place by them, by the international community, these entities have none on them. And this is a big problem. And they started out as minor technologies, but on the fringes of the technology world. But by the time we really noticed what can happen with them, they'd reached the tipping point.
Mhm.
And so right now we have no control over that. And this is one of the big questions of our time. How do we deal with situations like this? Do we put something like the Facebook under the control of all the governments then?
Mark Zuckerberg 2 weeks ago published something in the Washington Post where he said he would welcome the government regulation, and the reason is that they can't figure out what is political. Clearly, people are from the Russian trolls are trying to just make trouble in the U.S. by exacerbating tensions, social tensions. And so they're introducing this new rule, and it affects this very video that we are making right now. Because I have been trying to, for a year, I've been making videos which I was able to put onto Facebook and then boost. That is, I would pay them to disseminate this in all around the world, and it would go up to 50,000 or 60,000 people. And then suddenly they said, no, you can't send that to the US because you're talking about a political issue or a matter, as they put it, a matter of national importance. Anything that is a matter of national importance, a foreigner cannot send information into the US and pay to have it disseminated. I can post it all right, and people in the US, if they were my friends, can watch it, but I can't pay to have it disseminated because that's advertising. And so they've made this new rule. And now they've even extended the rule and say that nobody in any country can buy advertising of any set about any national importance matter to be disseminated in any other country. So people in the US can only talk to US people. People in Canada can only speak, I can only spread my videos to other people in Canada. I cannot I cannot boost it or advertise it or spread it, pay to have it spread in India or any place else except Canada. So here I am, unable to do the very thing that I've been doing as my big contribution to the last contribution I want to make on this planet before I kick off. I want to be able to do these things well. And because I think it's important to have these discussions global, and they won't let me do it. So I'm totally frustrated by it. And yet I understand, they're over a barrel. And so poor old Mark Zuckerberg said, I can't tell people what is a political issue and what's not. Everything personally that I, Meta Spencer, try to do is political. And they have cut off, when I've made a videos about how to plant trees in India, they have said that's too political. You can't disseminate that.
Okay, well, good luck with it.
Thank you. I'll send you the links whenever I can find a place to put it up.
Okay.
Thanks so much. Okay.
Good night.
Okay.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Carl.
This conversation is one of the weekly series Talk About Saving the World, produced by Peace Magazine and Project Save the World. Please visit our website at tosavetheworld.ca, where you can sign the Platform for Survival, a list of 25 public policy proposals that, if enacted, would greatly reduce the risk of 6 global threats to humankind. Come back next week for another discussion of a serious global issue.